This is one of those years that many people think should have been cancelled for obvious reasons. There's the pandemic, the reckless taking of Black lives across the world, which was brought to the fore, and even in Nigeria, there was the End SARS movement. As we move from one year into the next, I hope that we will just take time to consider how we may have inadvertently contributed to the evils of our world. So, I've decided to give us food for thought by tackling this question. Did slavery create an inferior race? Lest I forget, please subscribe. It's at Heaven Sent Knowledge on YouTube and at Heaven Sent Planners on Instagram. It takes me a long time to do the research, so it would be really nice if you encouraged me. Please subscribe. All right, thank you. Going back to the question, did slavery create an inferior race? Now, many would say that it did, or rather that the Black race was already inferior, so in effect, nothing new was created by slavery. They say that Africans must have already been inferior, or must have been inferior to have been captured in the first place and then transported to the Americas. But by this logic, white Europeans must also be inferior to Africans. When people think of slavery, they think of the transatlantic slavery, which started in 1510. But slavery didn't start then. It probably existed since the beginning of civilizations. For example, the ancient Egyptians or the Kemet, which date back 5,000 years, they had slaves. The Vikings had slaves, and later on, European slavers sold other white Europeans, mainly from Eastern Europe, to the Islamic world, where there was a huge market for them. The transatlantic slave trade, which lasted 350 years, at the very same time as that was going on, Europeans were taken into slavery by North Africans. Algiers, Tunisia, and Tripoli were the main slave port cities, so roughly around there. Algiers, for example, had 75 corsair ships, which were used for not just capturing fishing vessels, but also for conducting inland raids. And they would conduct these raids in the region around the Mediterranean, so roughly about there, and then all the way up to the British Isles, and then even as far as Iceland. The region to the west coast of the United Kingdom, so there, was repeatedly attacked. The situation was so bad that in 1640, a committee for the Algiers was set up by Parliament to oversee the ransoming of captives. And so many slaves were freed in this manner. They were bought by the committee. At the time, it was reported that 3,000 to 5,000 English people were held captive in Algiers. Between 1550 and 1730, the white slave population in Algiers stood consistently at 25,000, and sometimes it doubled. With so much free labor, Algiers blossomed into the most beautiful, or one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Having immaculate streets, elegant houses, manicured gardens, and handsome pavilions. Slaves were used for construction as agricultural laborers, quarrymen, and ship galley workers. Modern historians estimate that in all, between 1530 and 1780, at least 1 million European captives were enslaved on the North African coast. So blacks could not have been inferior to whites simply by virtue of being taken as slaves, because whites were also enslaved by blacks. Slavery seems to almost have been a natural thing in the ancient world, as people were taken as spoils of war, or simply because. Everyone enslaved everyone they could capture. Unfortunately, when Africans got to North America, lies were told about them and negligent misrepresentations of their history were made. For example, the African slaves in the USA were described as dumb, as lazy, immoral, and prone to commit crimes. But in contrast, the Africans in the British West Indies were seen as civilized, as relatively docile population who were accustomed to discipline and cooperated well on a given task. Famous philosophers, including the 19th century German philosopher Hegel, declared that Africa has no history and no civilization. But this cannot be true, because Africa is now regarded as the birthplace of humanity and the cradle of civilization. The ancient Egyptians were the most advanced civilization for almost 3,000 years and gave rise to many scientific developments in engineering, mathematics, architecture, and medicine. Some historians even believe that Egypt had an important influence on ancient Greece, as Aristotle and Plato's work was largely based on Egyptian scholarship. Scholars such as Pythagoras studied there, and what is commonly known as Pythagoras' theorem was well known to ancient Egyptians hundreds of years before his birth. In fact, before the Egyptian Empire, the Tasseti Kingdom existed in Nubia, modern day Sudan. They were probably the earliest known state to exist in history. The Malian Empire, which is found in West Africa, in this region, consists of the countries of modern day Guinea, Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Mauritania, Niger, and Guinea Bissau, is credited for establishing what is probably the world's first constitution, the Manden Charter of 1236. This charter established a set of laws by which different kingdoms under the empire would be governed. Please check out my video on this for more information. The Malian Empire is also credited with giving us the world's richest man of all time, Mansa Musa. He was a king who brilliantly harnessed the land's resources, mainly gold. Under him, the empire prospered and it thrived, economically, socially, and also intellectually. He established Timbuktu as a center for scholarship. Academics from all over the world were welcomed and they were handsomely maintained by the kingdom. Please check out my video on Mansa Musa as well. Economic activity existed in Africa long before the coming of the Europeans. Indeed, it was the gold from the great empires of West Africa that provided the means for economic takeoff of Europe in the 13th and the 14th centuries, and encouraged European explorers to voyage into Africa this way, intending to bypass the middlemen of the Sahara in order to find the source of the gold. By the 15th century, Kano in northern Nigeria was already established as a center of commerce. In 1851, decades before colonization, the German traveler Heinrich Barth wrote that he found for sale in Kano products from all over Europe, including France, Italy, Germany, and the United Kingdom. There were established trading routes with India, China, and other parts of Asia long before European intervention. This was along the east coast of Africa. There were also many nations in Africa that contributed immensely to art, nations such as the Benin Kingdom. They existed from about 900 AD until when Benin City was raided by the British in 1897. The British were amazed by the intricacy of the sculptures and by the mastery of the technique that was used, and they were astounded because the people that made them were supposedly primitive and savage. Nothing the world over compared to this. Today, this work is found in museums across the West, in the United States of America, Germany, UK, and France. So the transatlantic slavery could not have created an inferior race, nor did it happen because Africans were inferior to Europeans. Slavery existed in all parts of the earth, and they could have been white or black or Christian or Muslim or Jews or pagan. The attribution of one race as inferior to another, academics are now saying, never existed in ancient times, but is a social, political, and economic construct of the USA, which they exported to the rest of the world. The leaders of that society did this to ensure that their position at the helm of society was maintained, and somehow they got the rest of the world to believe it. I'm not judging because it was done in self-preservation. That is what the world knew to do, conquered or be conquered. But we do need to break the cycle of suppressing others in order to get ahead. It is very possible for all of us to succeed together. So as we start this new year, let us all, black and white, Christian and Muslim, rich and poor, just question our thoughts about each other and think a little deeper about the origin and the implication of our beliefs about one another. And I hope that we work towards shedding the hold of fear, masked in hatred, in discrimination, unconscious bias, and of course racism. pray that you have a very happy new year and a prosperous 2021. Thank you for listening. God bless.